Welcome to the lands of science fiction stories. I wish you a pleasant listening experience.
Korak Than, commander of the Zhurn elite forces, stood on the barren plateau of Ganaran, a planet known for its harsh conditions, unforgiving terrain, and hostile native creatures. He surveyed the battlefield, a wasteland stretching for miles under a crimson sky. His target, a group of human soldiers, the first to ever challenge the Zhurn for dominance on this deadly planet. The very idea seemed laughable. Humans were fragile, soft creatures, their homeworld a mere curiosity in the grand expanse of the galaxy. His second-in-command, a massive warrior named Vrek, approached, his exoskeleton clicking with every movement. "Commander Than, the humans are ahead, moving toward the Ridge of Daggers. They seem unaware of the coming storm," Vrek said, his mandibles twitching in disdain. Than narrowed his eyes. "Unaware or unafraid?" Vrek clicked his mandibles in agreement. "Their arrogance will be their undoing. The Zhurn were the galaxy's masters of survival, their planet among the most treacherous in the known systems. Ganaran, however, was another beast entirely. Its surface was a relentless death trap, with sudden storms, acid rains, and a native predator known as the Yarlock, a creature capable of tearing through armor with ease. "Prepare the assault team," Than ordered. "We will crush them before they even realize their mistake." Meanwhile, Lieutenant Jack Crusher Kale stood on a jagged outcrop watching the horizon. His squad of 6 humans, hardened veterans of Earth's special forces, moved efficiently across the uneven terrain. They were here for one reason: to prove that humans, the so-called Deathworlders, could handle anything the galaxy threw at them. Kyle smirked as he heard the low hum of energy weapons in the distance. "Looks like the Zhurn are finally making their move. Let's give them a warm welcome." Sergeant Will Harper, his second-in-command, grinned, his eyes scanning the barren landscape. "Think they know what they're up against yet?" "Not a clue," Cal replied, "but they'll find out soon enough." The Zhurn had always believed themselves superior. Their harsh environment had turned them into what they considered the galaxy's apex predators, a title they were about to lose. For humans, survival wasn't just instinct. It was a way of life. Earth, classified as a death world by galactic standards, had bred a species that thrived under pressure, that didn't just endure, but excelled in the face of danger. Kale adjusted his visor, the heads-up display highlighting several Zhurn squads moving toward their position. "Looks like we're surrounded. Harper, you ready?" "Always. Let's show them what fragile humans are made of." The Zhurn approached the human encampment, their energy rifles humming with lethal power. Vrek moved silently beside Than, his multi-limbed body blending seamlessly with the jagged rocks and outcroppings. They had the advantage: numbers, terrain, and superior technology. Than raised his arm, signaling his soldiers to fan out. "Surround them. No survivors." As the Zhurn moved into position, something unexpected happened. A high-pitched whistle cut through the air, followed by an explosion that sent several Zhurn soldiers flying. The humans had laid traps, crude by Zhurn standards, but effective nonetheless. "Contact!" Than snarled, ordering his troops to open fire. Bright blue energy bolts flew toward the human position, but Kale and his squad moved with precision, ducking and weaving through the terrain like they had rehearsed it 1,000 times. Plasma fire rained down, but the humans shrugged it off, their armor taking the brunt of the damage. They moved closer, their rifles spitting out bursts of deadly fire. "Is that all you've got?" Harper shouted over the roar of battle, his voice filled with a mocking confidence that infuriated Than. Vrek launched himself at Kyle, his massive frame blocking out the sun as he descended upon the human lieutenant. With his 4 arms and razor-sharp claws, he was a walking tank, built to destroy. Kyle didn't flinch. In a split second, he rolled to the side, dodging Vrek's crushing blow. In one fluid motion, Kyle drew his combat knife and drove it deep into Vrek's exposed flank. The Zhurn warrior roared in pain, swinging wildly, but Kyle was already gone, disappearing into the dust and shadows. "You'll have to do better than that," Kyle shouted, his voice dripping with mockery. Than watched in disbelief. These humans, they were fast, too fast, and they weren't afraid. Where most species would falter under such conditions, these Deathworlders thrived. As the battle raged on, Thon found himself in a brutal close-quarters fight with Harper. The human was relentless, his fists and knife a blur of motion. Every time Thon thought he had the upper hand, Harper would slip out of reach, dodging attacks with a maddening precision. "You fight well, human," Thon growled, his voice strained as he parried. Another strike. "But your kind are weak, fragile. You won't survive here." Harper grinned, his eyes gleaming with amusement. "Weak? Fragile? Buddy, we were born in a place 10 times worse than this. You call this dangerous? We call this a walk in the park." With a final brutal strike, Harper disarmed Thon, sending his weapon clattering to the ground. The Zhern commander fell to his knees, his chest heaving with exhaustion. Cal approached, his rifle slung casually over his shoulder. "You Zhern like to think you're the galaxy's toughest, but the truth is, you don't understand real danger." Than glared up at him, his pride shattered. "What are you?" Kale smirked. "We're humans, and we don't just survive, we conquer." The surviving Zhern forces were in full retreat, their morale shattered, their elite commander bested by what they had once considered a fragile, inferior species. But the humans didn't pursue. They didn't need to. The message had been sent loud and clear. The galaxy had a new apex predator. As Thon limped away, his mind raced. How could this be? How could a species as seemingly insignificant as humans defeat the mighty Zhern? But deep down, he knew the truth. Humans weren't like any other species. They didn't just adapt to danger, they thrived in it, and now the galaxy would never forget it. The storm clouds over Ganairan began to roll in, darkening the already bleak landscape. Thunder rumbled ominously, and the scent of ionized air filled the human squad's senses. Lieutenant Jack Crusher Kyle scanned the horizon with a focused intensity, his thoughts still lingering on the retreating Zhern forces. They had underestimated the humans, just as everyone in the galaxy had. That mistake had cost them dearly. "Lieutenant," Sergeant Harper called out, wiping the blood off his knuckles with a rag. "Storm's coming in fast. If we're staying, we'll need to find cover soon." Kyle nodded, turning his gaze to the jagged outcropping ahead. "There's a series of caves near the ridge. We'll set up camp there for now." Corporal Mira Kane, the squad's tech specialist, adjusted her tactical goggles as she eyed the encroaching storm. "This planet keeps throwing surprises. How can these Zhern live on a rock like this?" "They don't live here," Cal said, moving toward the caves. "They train here. Big difference." The squad followed Kale's lead, their movements swift and efficient despite the howling winds picking up around them. Ganairan storms were infamous for their sudden onset and devastating power, but the humans moved with practiced ease, each of them keenly aware that the chaos of the environment was just another factor to be managed. As they reached the mouth of the cave, Harper glanced back. "Think the Zhern will regroup? They don't strike me as the kind to admit defeat that easily." Kale shrugged. "If they do, it won't matter. We've already shown them what happens when they underestimate us." Far across the battlefield, in the shattered remains of what had once been the Zhern Forward Command Post, Commander Korak Than seethed in silence. The few surviving members of his once formidable team gathered around, their injuries glaring proof of their humiliating defeat. His second in command, Vrek, lay in the makeshift medical tent, barely conscious, his armored frame torn apart by the human lieutenant's knife. The shame of their loss weighed heavily on Than's shoulders. The Zhern were the undisputed masters of survival, their pride rooted in centuries of dominance over every species that challenged them. But these humans, these Deathworlders, had shattered that illusion in mere hours. "We need reinforcements," one of his soldiers, a lean warrior named Drask, muttered as he limped toward Than. "The humans, they're not like anything we've faced." Than clenched his fists. "Reinforcements? You think the Zhern Empire would send reinforcements to deal with a handful of humans? Number, we fight with what we have. We will reclaim our honor, or we will die trying." "But Commander," Than cut him off with a glare. "Enough. We regroup. We adapt. They may be strong, but they are not invincible. No creature is." Drask bowed his head, retreating in silence. The Zhern might be reeling, but they were far from defeated. Thon knew that the humans would make their next move soon. He needed to be ready. This was no longer about winning. This was about survival of a different kind. The survival of the Zhurn's reputation. And Commander Thon would die before letting that crumble. Back at the caves, the human squad settled in. The winds howled just outside their shelter, creating a cacophony of noise that would have unnerved any lesser species. But for Kale and his squad, it was a familiar sound. The sound of nature testing them, pushing them to the limit, just as Earth's own wild environments had done throughout their lives. Corporal Kane sat near the entrance, her fingers working quickly to repair a damaged component of her rifle. "We going to stay put until the storm clears?" she asked, her voice calm, yet alert. Kyle shook his head. "We're moving at dawn. The Zhurn won't sit idle. If I were them, I'd already be planning a counterattack. We need to stay ahead of them. Keep them off balance." Harper leaned back against the cave wall, cracking his knuckles. "Fine by me. I'm just itching to put these Zhurn in their place again." Cal smirked. "We'll get our chance." The squad shared a brief moment of silence, each soldier mentally preparing for what lay ahead. They knew the Zhurn wouldn't take their defeat lightly. The next encounter would be even more vicious, more desperate. As Kale reviewed the terrain map on his wrist display, something flickered in the distance. Small, subtle, but unmistakable. "Everyone down," he barked. In an instant, the squad dropped to the ground, their weapons drawn, eyes scanning the cave entrance. The sound of energy blasts echoed outside, the blue glow illuminating the dark cave as Zhurn soldiers advanced. "They found us faster than I thought," Kyle muttered, pulling his rifle close. "Harper, flank them from the left. Kine, stay on comms. Let me know if they've got reinforcements coming." Harper moved like a shadow, his heavy frame surprisingly light as he slipped out of the cave, blending into the rocky terrain. Kane crouched low, her fingers dancing across her communicator, analyzing the enemy's approach. Kale took position near the cave's mouth, his rifle aimed at the first silhouette that appeared. The Zhurn had brought more firepower this time, but that didn't matter. They could have brought an entire fleet. It wouldn't change a thing. Humans didn't just survive under pressure. They thrived. The first Zhurn soldier broke through the rocks, his rifle aimed squarely at Kale. The human lieutenant squeezed the trigger before the alien could react, the sharp crack of his rifle filling the air as the Zhurn fell to the ground, his armor pierced clean through. Cal's heart raced, adrenaline coursing through his veins, but his mind remained calm. This was where humans excelled. When chaos reigned, they found clarity. Outside the cave, Harper had already taken out 2 Zhurn soldiers, his combat knife flashing in the dim light as he moved silently between the rocks. He was a ghost, slipping in and out of their line of sight before they even realized he was there. "Clear on the left," Harper whispered through the comm. "Moving to circle back." Kane's voice crackled through Kale's earpiece. "More Zhurn coming, 6 o'clock. Looks like they've brought a heavy unit." Kyle grinned, his eyes narrowing. "Perfect. Let them come." Commander Thon watched the battle unfold from the ridgeline above. His forces were pouring everything they had into this attack. But the humans weren't breaking. If anything, they were growing stronger with each passing minute. "They're toying with us," Thon muttered, his jaw clenched in frustration. "How are they doing this?" Beside him, Drask stood silently, his confidence in the Zhurn's superiority shaken to the core. "They don't fight like anyone we've faced before. It's like they enjoy it." Thon's eyes burned with fury. He had to find a way to turn the tide, to show these humans what it truly meant to face the Zhurn elite. There had to be a way. As he scanned the battlefield, his gaze fell upon a distant mountain range, and an idea began to form. "Prepare the seismic charges," Thon ordered. "If we can't break them in combat, we'll bury them alive." Drask blinked in surprise. "You mean to collapse the entire ridge?" Thon nodded, a cold determination settling over him. "The humans may be strong, but even they can't survive being buried under a mountain." The battle continued to rage outside the cave, but deep below the ground, the real threat was already being set in motion. Thon's last gambit had begun, and Kale and his squad had no idea what was about to hit them. The sky above Ganaran rumbled with ominous thunder, and the fierce winds whipped through the terrain as if heralding the final confrontation. Kale's squad was holding strong inside the cave, exchanging precise, calculated fire with the advancing Zern forces. The odds should have been overwhelming, but the humans had long stopped playing by the galaxy's rules. They moved through the chaos as if they had been born to it. "Sergeant, cover me!" Kale barked, his voice cutting through the crackle of plasma bolts. Harper responded immediately, popping out from behind cover and unloading a spray of rifle fire at the encroaching Zern soldiers. His shots were flawless, dropping 2 enemies before they could even take aim. Kale darted out from the cave, firing short bursts as he maneuvered through the rocky terrain. The Zern forces were relentless, but the humans had something they didn't: resilience born from surviving a world more hostile than anything the Zern could ever imagine. Kane's voice came through the comms, panic in her tone for the first time since the battle had begun. "Lieutenant, I'm picking up seismic activity beneath us. It's not natural. Something's going on underground." Kyle cursed under his breath. "They're trying to bury us alive. Smart, but desperate." Harper ducked behind a rock, glancing at Kale. "What's the plan?" "I don't fancy being turned into space debris under a mountain." "We move fast," Kyle replied. "We need to get out of this cave before they bring it down on us." High above the battlefield, Commander Korak Thon watched the unfolding chaos through his tactical visor. His troops were stalling the humans long enough for the seismic charges to take effect. Any moment now, the ground beneath the humans would crack, and the entire ridge would collapse, burying them in rubble. He would reclaim his honor in the Zern's eyes by ensuring these Deathworlders never left Gunniran alive. The ground began to rumble more violently. Thon's lips curled into a cruel smile. The human's fate was sealed. Inside the cave, the shaking intensified. Rocks tumbled from the ceiling, dust filling the air as the walls began to crack. The sound of shifting earth roared through the enclosed space, drowning out the din of battle. Kyle felt the tremors beneath his boots, each one stronger than the last. He knew time was running out. "Harper, Kane, we need to move. Now!" Kane checked her scanners again, her eyes widening as she saw the readings. "Lieutenant, the charges are going off. They're going to bring the entire ridge down." Cal glanced at the mouth of the cave and the open battlefield beyond. They couldn't survive the collapse, not even with their armor and training. But if they were fast enough, they might just make it. "Everyone fall back!" Cal shouted, motioning his squad toward the exit. "We're getting out of here before the whole place caves in." They sprinted for the entrance, the ground splitting and shuddering beneath them as the first of the seismic charges detonated deep below. Harper was the first to make it out, rolling to the side just as a section of the cave's ceiling came crashing down. Kyle and Kane were right behind him, narrowly avoiding the falling rocks and debris. The moment they hit open ground, the full force of the Zern assault hit them again. Plasma bolts streaked through the air, forcing the humans to dive for cover. Kyle glanced back at the cave they had just escaped. The entire structure was beginning to collapse, and the shock waves from the seismic charges were spreading outward, threatening to bring the entire ridgeline down. "They're going all in," Kale muttered. "They'll bury us and themselves if it means they win." Harper reloaded his rifle, a smirk tugging at his lips. "Then let's make sure they don't get the chance." Thon watched from his vantage point, his satisfaction growing as the ridge continued to buckle and crack. The humans were still alive, but they wouldn't be for long. With the cave collapsing behind them and the Zern forces closing in, their doom was inevitable. "Commander," Drask said, his voice filled with nervous excitement, "the humans are trapped. The charges are working perfectly." "Good," Than replied, his eyes gleaming with cold determination. "Let them struggle. Let them understand what it means to face true warriors." But as Thon spoke, a blinding flash of light erupted from the battlefield below. A deafening explosion followed, shaking the ground beneath his feet. His tactical visor flared with warnings as multiple energy readings spiked in quick succession. "What? What's happening?" Than snarled. Drask checked his readings, his face going pale. "The humans, they've rigged explosives. They're taking down the whole ridge with them." Cal and his squad moved quickly, planting charges along the weakened ground, using the seismic activity against their enemies. If the Zern thought they were going to bury them, they were about to find out that humans didn't just adapt. They turned the situation to their advantage. "Charges set!" Kynes shouted, ducking behind a rock as the ground rumbled beneath her. "Blow it!" Kale ordered, his voice hard and unyielding. The squad's explosives detonated in unison, triggering a massive chain reaction. The entire ridgeline trembled as the seismic activity escalated, and suddenly the very ground that the Zern had counted on began to turn against them. Massive sections of the ridge collapsed, sending Zern soldiers plummeting into the abyss below. Kale glanced at Harper, the chaos swirling around them. "Time to finish this," Harper grinned. "Couldn't have said it better myself." Commander Thon watched in horror as the battlefield turned into a maelstrom of destruction. His forces were being swallowed by the collapsing ridge, their carefully laid plans falling apart before his eyes. The humans had done the impossible. They had turned certain death into victory. "No," Thon whispered, his fists clenched so tightly his claws cut into his palms. "This cannot be." But it was. The last of his forces were falling, their elite warriors crushed by the very terrain they had sought to control. And in the center of it all, the humans stood, unbroken, unstoppable. Epilogue. The new apex days later, the dust settled over Ganairan. The Zern forces had been annihilated, their defeat sealed by their own arrogance. Commander Korak Thon's name would be remembered, not as a hero, but as the leader who underestimated the galaxy's most dangerous species. Kale stood on a high ridge, surveying the battlefield below. Harper, Kane, and the rest of the squad gathered around him, their mission complete. "Guess they won't be underestimating humans again anytime soon," Harper said, cracking his knuckles. Kale smirked, his gaze fixed on the distant horizon. "Number they won't." The Zern had believed themselves to be the galaxy's apex predators. But now the truth was clear. Humans didn't just survive. They thrived. They conquered. And the galaxy would never forget it. End of story.